Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome back to Sound Design with Callen. In this week's episode, I'm going to show you how to make a really weird telephone sustained bass riser thing. Check it out. Sounds crazy, right? But it's actually a lot simpler than you think to make. Let's go ahead and dive in. All right, guys. So the first thing you're going to want to do is open up Oscillator A. We're going to open up the Virtual Riot Wavetables Volume 2 folder. If any of you guys have trouble finding this online, reach out to me and I'd be happy to send it to you. It's super easy to find though. If you go to Reddit, I'm sure you can find it there in seconds. But again, if anybody needs help finding it, let me know. I could send you a copy. Anyways, we're going to go ahead and open this up and we're going to go to the dying triangle. Oscillator B, we're going to go ahead and use basic shapes and set it to a triangle. Next, I want to make sure that our sub oscillator is turned on and that we bring this down to about 9%. Also, make sure that you bring down your master just a little bit so it doesn't get too loud. Perfect. Next thing that we're going to want to do is go ahead and adjust the octaves of both Oscillator A and Oscillator B. So Oscillator A, we're going to go ahead and bring up to 4, and Oscillator B, we're going to bring down to -3. Lastly, before we start adjusting any knobs, let's go ahead and turn on our filter, and we're going to set this to multi and band notch. And what a band notch is essentially just a bandpass folder, except for we have a notch included within it. So a bandpass is normally just a shape like this. We move it back and forth. It kind of takes out some of the lows and the highs. But when we add the notch in there, we can also modulate that with the frequency knob. And we're going to come back to this in just a few moments. Go ahead and bring the cutoff down to 15 Hertz. Bring the resonance up to 71%. Leave the pan where it's at. We do want to bring our drive up to 32%. And our frequency should be set to 88%. Again, we're going to adjust these parameters in just a few minutes with the LFOs. Now we're going to go ahead and adjust these knobs within Oscillator A and Oscillator B. So the first thing I want to do is go ahead and bring the random knobs down on both Oscillator A and Oscillator B, because we are going to be frequency modulating and we don't want the sound to be starting at random points. We want it to start from the very beginning. Let's go ahead and bring the detune down to 12 and the blend to 29. Make sure the wavetable position is set to 170. Again, we are going to be frequency modulating from B, so make sure that's turned on. And with that being said, we're going to go ahead and bring down Oscillator B's level. Let's go ahead and bring down Oscillator A's level as well, as we're going to be modulating that with LFOs. Lastly, we're going to go ahead and turn on the sync mode of Oscillator B, and we're just going to go ahead and leave that at 1%. Now that we have the knobs on everything set in play, let's go ahead and draw our LFOs and start assigning them to different parameters. Let's go ahead and start with LFO 1. It's going to be very simple. We're going to go ahead and just draw a shape that looks something like this. It should look something like this. Make sure that we set this to envelope mode and not trigger mode. And what trigger mode does, as opposed to envelope mode, when we assign an LFO to a parameter, you'll notice that when we hold a key down, it keeps on starting from the beginning and then going to the end. From the beginning, going to the end, beginning, going to the end. When we set it to envelope mode, it's just going to continuously loop itself until we let go of the key. I'm going to go ahead and turn the level of this off for now because I don't want to assign it to that parameter. But I just wanted to give you guys an example of what the difference between trigger mode and envelope mode does. LFO 2, we're simply just going to drag this over to the corner. We want to turn on triplet mode, and we're going to bring this down to 4 bars. Lastly, on LFO 3, we're going to draw a shape that looks something like this. Should look something like this. All right, so LFO 1, LFO 2, and LFO 3. Make sure that we set LFO 3's rate to 1 bar. And we also want it to be on envelope mode. Now that we have our LFO set up, let's go ahead and start assigning them to different parameters. We're going to go ahead and start with LFO 1, and we're going to drag it to the level of Oscillator A, and we're going to leave it at 100%. Next, I want to assign LFO 1 to the cutoff of our filter, and make sure that we bring this down to 48. Lastly, I want to drag LFO 1 to the frequency of our filter, and make sure this is set to -25. And you'll notice when I'm doing this, it's moving the notch back and forth, right? So when I set this to -25 and I hit a note, you're going to notice that the notch starts here and moves its way up towards the peak of our cutoff. And what that's doing is the notch is essentially blending with the peak of our cutoff, and it's forming like a little vowel movement, which is going to add a certain timbre to the sound that we're going to be working with later. So you'll notice one more time when I hit a key, both the notch and the tip of the resonance of the cutoff is going to make a sound of itself. We're going to go ahead and skip LFO 2 for now, as we're going to be assigning this to the effects tab here in just a few minutes. However, we can go ahead and jump to LFO 3, and we're going to assign this to the FM. Make sure that we bring our FM knob up to 55%, and we want to make sure that the blue knob is set to 46. And already we're getting a really cool sounding like telephone sustain bass type thing that we're going to get even cooler once we start messing with the effects tab. But for now, just to give you an idea of what it sounds like, it's pretty cool. Now that we're done messing around with the oscillators, let's go ahead and hop over into our effects tab. First thing I want to open up is our compressor. So the first thing I want to adjust is our attack. We're going to go ahead and change this to 497. Next, I want to set our release to 338. We're going to go ahead and bring the gain up to 17.7. Make sure multi-band mode is selected, and we're going to leave our mix at 100. And just from doing that alone, we're hearing a significant difference in the amount of compression that's going into our sound. Next, let's go ahead and turn on the reverb. We're going to set this to plate mode. We want to set our size to 12%, our pre-delay to 9, bring our low cut up to 49, our high cut to 72, bring our damp down to 11, and bring the width down to 7%. Our mix can go ahead and stay at 20%. And what the reverb is doing is just giving the sound a little bit more space. Next, we want to go ahead and open up our EQ so we can clean up the sound a little bit more. Make sure that the low cut and the high cut knobs are both on. Let's go ahead and bring our first frequency knob down to 22 Hertz. We're going to set our Q to 43%, and we're going to leave the gain at 0. On the right side, we're going to set this to 12,550. Bring our Q to 44%. And again, we're going to leave the gain knob at 0 on both sides. And really all we're doing with this EQ is just cutting out some of the high frequencies that we don't need. Last but not least is the most important step at this entire sound. We're going to go ahead and turn on the filter. And instead of having this on low, we're going to go to the miscellaneous tab and click on ring mod. You can go ahead and leave the knobs exactly where they're at. Make sure the mix is at 0, your pan is at 50%, drive is at 0, resonance at 0, and your cutoff should be at 332 Hertz. The only thing that we're going to be messing with later is the mix knob, but we're going to be using a macro knob to do that. So hang tight and we'll get to that in just a few minutes. However, the one thing that we are going to do is use LFO2 to modulate the cutoff of our ring mod. Make sure that this is set to bipolar mode. So how we do that is hold down the shift button if you're on a Mac, option, and click. And that's going to make it go from left to right as opposed to unipolar, which is just one direction. We want it to go back and forth, right? So once again, just hold shift, option, and click. Make sure that the blue is set to 100, so it goes all the way left and all the way right. Again, right now you're not going to hear anything because we have to adjust the mix later with our macro knob. All right, so now that we have the base of our sound complete, it's time to put the finishing touches on it. The first thing I want to do is assign one of our macro knobs to the octave of oscillator B. Once we do that, we want to make sure that we bring the macro knob down to around 15. Next, I want to go ahead and type in here phone speed. So now once we move this macro knob around, it's going to change the speed of the telephone sound. So I want to keep it on this middle one right here. But now that we have that, I want to make it sound even cooler. So what I'm going to do is go back into the effects tab, and all I'm going to do is drag this macro over to our mix knob. I said earlier we're going to come back to this, so here we are. Make sure that the blue knob is set to 100, and I think I'm going to call this macro something like instant riser, right? And the reason for that is because when I adjust this knob now, it's going to act as almost like a riser effect. So we're going to modulate this, and instead of it being like a telephone, it's going to almost do like a bit crush effect on the telephone sound itself. And it's just going to make this really weird riser type effect that could be used in buildups, in a drop, really for anything that you want. But go ahead and check this out. This is really sick. Crazy, right? I love that. That's so cool. This could be used in so many different ways, but I thought this was like a really cool touch to add to the sound. So instead of it just being a normal, sustain bass, you can literally turn it into an instant riser within seconds. Super cool. One last cool effect that you can do to make your sustain bass sound like it's in a different room or like super far away is drag this macro knob over to the mix of your reverb. Let's call this something like distance. And now when we adjust this macro, it's going to make the sound either further away or closer depending on how much reverb you want to use. I really like this effect because it almost makes it sound like there's a phone ringing in the other room. But yeah, feel free to mess around with different octaves, different keys on your keyboard to get different styles of telephones. As you can see, just from moving a few different things around, you can get a ton of different results. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope you guys like it. Feel free to copy this patch and use it in any of your songs, and tag me if you make something really cool. Thank you guys again for tuning in this week. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to follow me for more content.